going to start with a brief little introduction before introducing Dr. Rihn. Because native plants are defined in part by locality, as well as their timeline of existence is growing within a region before colonial times, we start each of these native plant connection webinars with a land acknowledgement. And I hope that in doing so, it honors the extensive contributions that Indigenous tribes have made to native plant biology and ecology. In a small way, it also provides a historical frame of reference to native plant ecology. If you are interested in understanding more about the history of land where you are tending native plants, you can visit the Native Land website to link directly to tribal boundaries in your region. Specifically today, I'm coming to you from Corvallis, Oregon, which is located in the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya. Following the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855, Kalapuya people were forcibly removed to reservations in Western Oregon. Today, living descendants of these people are part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. Also making the connection between Indigenous tribes and native plants, I did want to call out native plants of importance to the Kalapuya. These include camas, wapato, mattia, and white oak. The bulbs of camas and wapato were consumed. The seeds of showy tarweed or Mattia elegans were also collected and roasted. White oak acorns ground into flour and used for food as well. Once again, I encourage you to take the time to investigate the history of the land where you are tending native plants and learning more about Indigenous uses, as well as Indigenous plant ecology associated with different native plants. So honored that Dr. Alicia Rihn is able to join us today to teach us about marketing native plants to today's gardeners. Dr. Rihn joined the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville in July 2020. She is a Minnesota native with a background in specialty crop marketing research. Her research and extension programs focus on consumer behavior, willingness to pay, and perceptions of specialty crops and niche products. She is interested in addressing how people perceive products, interact with them, and the best marketing strategies to add value for consumers and businesses alike. She uses eye tracking technologies and applied economics to generate actionable insights based on these topics of interest. Her current research topics include plant benefit information, native plant perceptions, alternative pest control methods, e-commerce, and point of sale information. And with that, Dr. Rihn, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you, Gail, and thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to be sharing this work that we've been doing on native plants this past year, and to also be part of this project, kind of bringing that community together. And so today, as Gail mentioned, I'm going to be talking more from the marketing perspective, and to kind of give you an idea of where we are going. This is kind of the tentative agenda. So I'm going to start with just kind of the background information to the studies that I'll be sharing with you, including plant purchasing behavior for natives as well as some introduced, but primarily focusing on those native plants. And then I want to get into more of the perceptions of native plants, environmental gardening practices, and then touch on, we have a study going on looking at corporate customers. So if any of you have any of those folks in your clientele base, that one might be of particular interest to you. And then wrap up the whole talk with just recapping a few of those key insights. So I always start with acknowledgements because it's good to acknowledge those who have been helping along the way. The main study I'm going to be sharing with you today is a study funded by the Horticultural Research Institute, HRI, and I've got several collaborators that I would like to acknowledge. First is Bridget Behe over at Michigan State, Ariana Torres at Purdue, and then Sue Barton up at the University of Delaware. And so there are several factors that motivated why we were interested in looking at consumer behavior and native plants. One of them is increased urbanization. That's not a huge surprise to anyone who's in this audience, but it has been projected that by 2050, we'll have 9 billion people living in cities. And there's a big concern there that there may be some adverse effects of urbanization on the environment as well as quality of life. So there's a fair amount of research out there showing how connection with nature, how connection with plants is beneficial to people as well as the environment. And we've been looking at a lot of research lately, looking at the mental health benefits of plants, especially since the pandemic. People have been engaging with them more, and there's been proven studies that show that people do have reduced stress, increased relaxation, all these kind of beneficial, all of these psychological benefits related to being around plants. Now, if you add that native component to it, there's additional benefits on top of that, right? So we have that more, you gain benefits more related to the environment. You gain benefits of increased biodiversity, kind of completing that entire loop with the native species that are around. There's reduced inputs such as less fertilizer requirements, less pesticides, as well as improved pollinator health, especially for our native pollinators. So I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because you're all much more familiar with this than I am, but it's still part of what was pushing us towards looking at consumer perceptions of native plants. And so one of the key things here is perception is reality amongst customers. So what they believe, what they perceive is going to impact their choices and their behavior. And so when we talk about marketing studies and addressing consumer behavior through research, we need to understand perception first, because that's our baseline, that after that we can build some of our marketing messages and such. The other thing to bear in mind is that native plants are available in the US markets. Approximately 10% of all US green industry annual sales are attributed to native plants. However, not all of them are labeled as native, and the end customers, unless you tell them that it's a native plant, they don't necessarily know that unless they're a really enthusiastic person, which they're out there, but the majority of people would not necessarily be aware of that. As a result, clearly communicating that that plant is native, where it's native to, and any benefits associated with that plant is very important, especially at the point of sale. For example, using in-store signage or native plant sections, displays, that type of thing is a great way to get that message across to your customer. The other thing that kind of fell into this was that we have a lot of new gardeners. I'm sure all of you are aware of the increased demand that occurred in 2020 when people were home due to pandemic lockdowns. But we had 16 to 18 million new gardeners come into the marketplace during the pandemic. We have a study currently going on where we surveyed those folks, and most of them had less than 2 years of experience with plants of any kind. And when we asked, okay, well, you're inexperienced, you're enjoying this, how do we engage you more? How do we help you be successful and have a good experience with plants so that you keep being gardeners moving forward? And essentially it came down to them saying, I'm inexperienced, I need more information, I need educational content telling me how to be successful, how to diagnose this issue, and how to improve that. And so we've kind of got this perfect storm of, we have new people coming in looking for information, and they're looking to the experts, they're looking to the industry to provide that for them. And so we took all of these factors together and took it towards that native plant industry to see, how do people perceive native plants, and how can we kind of improve our communications in order to reach them and resonate with them better? So this is a marketing talk, and this is my one marketing slide. I always include this one simply because if you're like myself and you haven't had a marketing course in several years, this is a real good brief reminder. So the 4 P's of marketing are those that we have control over. They are all interrelated, and they are all based on what the company goals are. So who is the customer base? What are their behaviors? How many SKUs do you have? How do you want to reach them? What are they willing to pay? What's the competition? All of these items come into play with the 4 Ps of marketing. And those 4 Ps are product, price, promotion, and place. So the product, for example, in this case is native plants, and this can include all elements of branding, appearance, fragrance, features, any points of differentiation that fall within that product category. Price is the value to the buyer. So what are they willing to pay? What are you pricing it at? How does it sit relative to your competitors' prices? What's your customer's price sensitivity? And this can also include any discounts or sales that may be occurring. And then promotion essentially is any communication that you have with your customer group. And this includes any of your points of differentiation and messaging as well. This can be advertising format as well as methods and timing and location. We have very seasonal products. So for us, often this is a spring push, right? Depending on what you're selling, it could possibly be later in the summer or fall as well. And then place is what's your retail outlet? How are you getting that product to the customer? What are your distribution channels? And essentially, like I said, all of these factors we have control over, and we can build it together and leverage it in order to make our complete marketing package and talk about marketing strategies. Now, as I'm going through the rest of these slides, not everything may be applicable to you and your business. So I want you to just kind of keep these thoughts in mind as we move forward, because not everything's relevant for everyone. So pick and choose and pull that content that's relevant for you and use it however you may in order to be successful with your own firm. Okay. So as part of this particular study, we also wrote a paper looking at, well, essentially we're assessing the relationship between native plant preferences and environmental gardening practices. This one was published in the Journal of Environmental Horticulture. I have the citation there if you would like a copy to read all the nitty-gritty. I would be happy to provide that. Here, I'm just covering the good stuff, the key points. All right. So we asked our participants, how important is it to you to incorporate native plants into your home gardens and landscapes? On the left, you can see that distribution where about 4% of the sample said it's not at all important, but up to 16% said it was extremely important. With this distribution, we divided that sample into 3 groups, which is your pie chart on the right. And what we said was, okay, 50% of our sample said incorporating native plants into their landscape was very or extremely important. 33% said it was moderately important to them. And then 17% said, this isn't that important, it's only slightly important. And then what we did was we asked them about how they garden, specifically looking at these environment-related gardening practices. And 1 meant that it wasn't at all like them. They don't participate in that at all. Whereas 7 said, this is exactly like me. This is what I'm doing in my own garden. My green line is the middle. And again, I reorganized these just so you can see those that they say aligned with them and their own gardening practices the best, down to those that they don't. So the number 1 thing they do is recycle gardening packaging, followed by using pollinator-friendly plants, and then planting varieties that require less fertilizer or pesticides. They use native species in their gardens right here, and then they use soil amendments to improve soil health, as well as using plant varieties that require less water. And then we have a bit of a dip right here. They're still agreeing with it, but growing some of their own food. And then we see kind of a dip again here to using organic gardening practices, purchasing plants that are organically grown, as well as composting on their property and using that compost. And the one that they tend not to do is use rainwater barrels or collectors. So we took these same gardening practices and looked at them by the importance of incorporating natives into their gardens and landscapes. Our purple here is that very important group, the people who indicated they really value incorporating native plants. The teal is our moderately important group, and then that orange group is the one that were fairly indifferent and said it was either not important or only slightly important. And if you just look at the right here, you can see, 1, that those people that view incorporating natives as important, they agreed with all of these gardening statements substantially more than the other two groups, right? And then secondly, that moderately important group ended up in the middle. And then those who said it wasn't important, essentially they said this didn't align with their gardening practices nearly as much as the other two groups did. And so again, from kind of that positioning, the marketing perspective, what this tells us is there's an opportunity that if you primarily sell native plants or you're trying to encourage their growth in people's gardens, their purchasing, etc., then you may be able to align it with some products or gardening tools and things that align with these different environment-related gardening practices, right? So promoting, again, that pollinator-friendly plants is hot. That's one that's always should be talked about. Or also talking about less fertilizer, pesticides, and soil health, all of these. There's an opportunity to kind of place similar environment-related gardening practices materials near those native plants so that you can kind of leverage both off each other. So we use these results, put them in a model to see what would have a significant impact on the importance of native plants. And the number one thing, of course, was using native plants in the garden, followed by that pollinator-friendly plants and using plant varieties that require less water. Then we had organic gardening practices, recycling packaging, using rain barrels, and composting in my property. So we included all of the previously listed items, but these were the only ones that significantly improved the likelihood that they would view native plants as important in their gardens and landscapes. All right, so the last study I wanted to briefly touch on was we're working on a commercial property management study looking at if you are selling to commercial property management firms, what drives their sales, what drives their interest. Now, cautionary tale is these are preliminary results. These folks are very difficult to get a hold of. Everyone's very busy. And so we only have 5 or 6 people that we interviewed for this particular study at this point in time, and this is ongoing. Our research question was, what are the opportunities and barriers related to incorporating more native plantings in commercial landscapes? And to do this, we were interviewing different commercial property managers and landscapers. And if any of you fall into this category and want to be included, please reach out. We would love to talk to you and hear your viewpoints. We have a couple different collaborators on this particular study. We have Dean Rosencrans, Sue Barton at Delaware, and then Melinda Knuth at North Carolina State University. And so these are some of the more popular features that we found from talking to these different developers. So one of the interesting things, the opportunities here, fewer goose droppings. So when you think about commercial properties, if there's any water, right, and it's a lawn, you're going to have Canadian geese, and they don't like that. However, if you have taller grasses or shrubs, geese don't like to walk through that. So incorporating more of these naturalized landscapes reduces the goose droppings that are on site. They also liked having less water runoff or less or no irrigation requirements, right? And then they liked having kind of walking paths or benches, places that people could wander and walk through that landscape was viewed as a benefit to these different individuals, as was color. So we always say color sells in the ornamental plant industry. That holds true when it comes to commercial properties as well. And then they also expressed interest in native plants, pollinator gardens, as well as rain gardens. Now, this middle column, I labeled it as cultural change needed, and it's because these are their perceptions that they view, again, perception is reality, but may not necessarily be true. So there's an opportunity to educate. So they viewed more the traditional landscape, turf grass lawns, as being more appealing to investors and being more popular amongst tenants and employees. They viewed these lawns as being a little more accepted by neighbors as well as by governing regulators. As such, there's more of an opportunity, again, to kind of introduce these more natural, more native plantings and encourage them as being appealing to these different groups and being accepted by these different groups. And then in the last column here, we have additional considerations. And really for them, cost of maintenance is important. So if you can show that having native plantings costs them less in maintenance, maybe they have reduced inputs, reduced irrigation, less goose droppings to work into the soil, then that is one way to help sell that product and that design to these clients. In terms of aesthetic preferences, they had a choice experiment similar to what I was showing you for the native fall fruit and flowering customers, but these were, again, those commercial property folks. And so what you see is an example on the right where they had choice A, where there was a path but no flowers, choice B, a path with flowers. 80% of the sample went for the path with flowers, whereas 20% went for the path without flowers, okay? So some of the other aesthetic preferences that were observed is they really do like having lawn, some sort of visual break for people. They like having mulched beds, again, especially if it has color involved. Flowers and color were important, as well as additional paths or visual breaks. In terms of less important features, and as we talk to more people, this might change, or as customer interest in these different topics increase, this might change, but they were less interested in interpretive signage, carbon sequestration, reduced lower emissions, seasonal change, less mower noise, and then less pesticides and fertilizers. So it'll be interesting to see how this one changes as we get more data and can see what that corporate clientele is more interested in. Okay, so those are the key things that I wanted to talk to you about today. And just to wrap up, let me reiterate some of these key insights from these different studies. So in terms of that end consumer's motivation to purchase native plants, the number one thing was pollinator health. As the second is complementing their existing landscape and gardens, so that aesthetic that they like. Third is natural landscape restoration. And then 4 is helping out wildlife. And so as you think about marketing and promotions, it's good to reiterate these key motivations in signage at that point of sales so that people can make an informed choice as they're considering the plants they want to include in their gardens and landscapes. In terms of the perceived benefits that they see with native plants, they view them as being great for difficult sites. They view them as being less maintenance than exotic species, being valuable with water conservation and environmental health, improving biodiversity, as well as being beneficial for wildlife being less invasive than introduced species. So regarding that native plant importance study, people who viewed native plants as important participate in more environmentally friendly gardening practices than those who view native plants as being less important in their landscapes. So there's an opportunity here to align products, to align services, to align different elements within the retail center that can align these two expectations and habits amongst the customer group. And that's one way to improve their engagement. And then in terms of the regional differences, so native plants are preferred in general over those exotic introduced species. And this goes across the different regions, as well as the different aesthetics that we were looking at, including fruit, fall color, and flowers. So there was a strong preference provided people are informed about it at the point of sale. There were a couple regional differences. First was that in the West and the Southwest, water management's importance increased. So if you have any native plants that can help with that or don't require nearly as much irrigation and such, that would be a great thing to promote if you're out in the West or Southwest. In terms of places in the Southeast, Northeast, and Midwest, being pollinator friendly was viewed as a very important attribute. And then the Midwest also had this wildlife attractive attribute being important. So depending on where you are and where you're selling your native plants, these are different environmental attributes that may resonate better with your customer base. In terms of our corporate clients, they have a set of distinct needs as well. So water and irrigation management was important to them. Reducing the need to water is definitely a benefit there. Having a lawn path or visual break is also viewed positively, as well as mulched beds and having flowers or color available to engage people more when they're in those corporate environments. All right. So I wanted to wrap up with just a brief overview of the works in progress related to native plants. So the one that I primarily talked about today is the first one on the left, that native plants perception study. We are wrapping that up, looking at different customer segments and doing some additional analyses with the idea of providing target marketing strategies that then could be used moving forward to position native plants in a more favorable way. Secondly, we have another study coming up looking specifically at marketing strategies of native plants. That one's currently in design, and hopefully we'll have some results early next year. Our commercial property study is still ongoing. If you think you would like to participate or provide us insights, we would love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out to myself or Gail, and we'll get you connected to the right people. And then the native plant connection, which is what today's webinar is part of, is still in progress as well. And if you have not had a chance to visit their website, if you hold up your smartphone, turn on your camera and hold it up to this QR code, that'll take you directly to that website. And then you can kind of see more about the research team, our specialties, what we're trying to do with the native plant connection, and build that network as well. And we'd love to hear from you. So that is all I have for you today. I'm happy to take any questions that we may have.
Thank you so much, Alicia. That was wonderful. There are questions that have come in through the chat pod. So several were related to the first study that you showed, the 2022 perception study. One was wanting to know more information about how that survey was advertised. Was native plant used in the title? Do you think that might have, the way the survey was advertised might have affected who responded? If so, how much?
Yes. So by IRB, we are required for institutional review board that we need to say what the title of the study is. So yes, we did need to say native plants in that title. And people self-select. So if they are not interested in that particular survey, they can choose to pass on it. And so that can impact our results. This is just a subsample of the United States. And what I view happening on this was an online survey, by the way, because then we're able to reach those different regions and collect a sample from those different areas. But what we'll do is with that next study looking at marketing, we'll be able to compare and contrast and see how reliable those results are across the two samples. So instead of only having 2,000 people, we'll likely have 4,000, and then we'll be able to go from there and make better estimates of what we're seeing. So yeah, there may have been some folks that are more enthusiastic about this, but we also had that group of people that were less interested in natives, which is why we were looking at the differences between these folks that said that they were not important versus those that were important, because ultimately it's a smaller portion of our sample, but it is important to understand what's going through their minds and what's driving them or preventing them from looking at native plants.
Thank you so much. Okay, the second question was also related to that first survey that you talked about, and really whether or not people were able to accurately say, yes, they had a native plant, or no, they have a native plant. So I think only 15–18% said they didn't know. I bought native plants, but when you look at what they purchased, the plants were not native. Did your study verify the native status of plants participants reported as native?
So we have that data. I have not gotten to it because we asked, okay, have you bought a native plant this past year? And then we left a text, fill in the blank, right? Well, when you have 2,066 plants to go through, I haven't quite gotten there yet, but that is on our to-do list so that we can say, okay, well, you listed a Bodilia, that's not native, right? Because you're right. Some people may have been confused, which I really do appreciate when they answer, I don't know, because that tells us point blank that there's room for education, right? So yeah, we are going to be double checking that. It's just we haven't gotten there yet because this data just came in this fall. So still a work in progress.
Thank you. Another question, which was typed in during that first survey, wanting to know if folks were viewing native plants as encouraging wildlife as either a positive or negative thing from the consumer's point of view.
That's a great question, and one that I wish we would have dug into a little bit more, because I suspect the person who asked the question is thinking deer, right? They come and eat, and you're like, as a gardener, it's a little disheartening, especially if it's something you really like. But yet you also have people that feed deer and like seeing them in their landscapes. We didn't dive into that because I think we left it purposely broad at this point as a first initial exploratory study, with the idea of then with the marketing one, we can dive in deeper and see, is there a specific type of wildlife like birds, right, that people may enjoy having in their property and bringing them in and attracting them in, more so than maybe that wildlife that may be more destructive to your landscape.
Thank you. A question about whether or not you see a trend of native plants becoming more and more preferred over the past few years, and whether or not you have any numbers to show growing preference for native plants.
I would say, just based on the people I've been visiting with and looking at some of the data that we have in some of the other studies we're conducting, that demand seems to be increasing. And I think it has to do a lot with, there's this big environmental push, right? Especially amongst millennials, who they're more, traditionally people tend to buy goods to reflect themselves, whereas millennials are spending more money on experiences, more money on sustainability and showing their support of sustainability. And native plants tend to align really well with that core message. So then when you paired people being home with the pandemic and millennials coming into their own, so they have a higher income, they're first-time home buyers, they have children and want to give their children that opportunity to be hands-on with plants, and pair that with the environmental benefits of native plants, you kind of have a win-win situation where people are desiring products that are better for the environment, and native plants have those environmental benefits. Did I get both parts of that, Gail?
I think yes.
Okay.
And then for the choice experiment, there was a question about whether or not you had data specific for just the Northwest, that you separately presented data from between the Southwest and the West. Is it possible to get data just for the Northwest?
Just for the Northwest, possibly. The reason I say that is I'm trying to remember, I think we collected by the state and then we grouped them by the state. So with that in mind, there would be potentially the opportunity to pull Northwest data if I knew which states were going to be included therein.
Thank you. I'm originally from the Mid-Atlantic, from Baltimore, Maryland. So it was like, I never knew what people were talking about when they said PNW, Pacific Northwest, but it's typically considered Oregon, Washington, Idaho.
Okay.
Well, Dr. Rihn, I just want to thank you for educating all of us today about marketing strategies tied directly to native plants, even to the specificity of region, such valuable information. For all of you that are interested in accessing a recording of this webinar, give me about a week to close caption it. All of you are the lucky ones that get to see the full webinar, because we'll be cutting out some of the unpublished data that Dr. Rihn shared with us today until she has an opportunity to publish that. Our next webinar is going to be on April 19th. Dr. Megan Avolio from Johns Hopkins University is going to be talking to us about the importance and benefits of preserving genetic diversity in native nursery plants. And then I just wanted to note that May's webinar, these webinars are always the third Wednesday of the month. May's webinar is actually going to touch on some of the pollinator preference for native plants that Dr. Rihn alluded to today. So please stay in touch with us. And Thank you for joining us, and most especially, thank you for Dr. Rihn, who is joining us on her vacation. My God, we're so grateful for your expertise and your time. Thanks, everyone.